Hello and welcome, friends of the paranormal. This is your co-host, Stu, and I'm here with the paranormalist, Patty Wilson. Patty, how are you this sunny but blustery October 19th Sunday? Yes. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, it is. Doing just fine. It's very blustery where I'm at and about for the heavens to open up on us.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I'm hoping I don't lose power. That would be not a good thing to happen. And I still am, and although you're going to be doing the majority of the talking, every once in a while you'll see me turn my head and cough, and even though the microphone system will automatically attenuate that sound, man, I still have had this cold for over 3 weeks now. So I wish it would go away, but it hasn't. Um, on the topic of the book giveaway, we had just a couple of entries, which I was hoping we would have had more, but we would like to announce that Desiree Fleury is the winner of the book. So congratulations, Desiree, and I will be sending you an email after Patty and I record this episode to get what you would prefer for the inscription and your mailing address, wherever you'd like that to be sent. So congratulations, Desiree. We'd also like to thank everyone who entered the contest. Unfortunately, we can't have everybody be a winner. You're already a winner just by listening to this podcast, but we only had the one book, so we apologize for those who weren't fortunate. That's all I have to say on that topic, unless you do.
Nope, I'm good.
All right. In the description of the podcast, you will find links to our Facebook groups, our email address, everything Paranormalist podcast related. And I have really talked way more than I wanted to today, especially with having a cold still. So at this point, I'll ask you, what's our topic?
Well, we're coming up on Halloween, so I'm going to tell spooky stories.
Excellent. I wondered when this episode would be, and we apologize for missing last week, but even though I had a cold, I was on vacation.
Okay. So the first story is going to be from South Carolina, and it is a story that took place in about 1949 in a little area called Bramlett. There was a road that ran through there called the Bramlett County Road, and this took place, as I said, in that spot. So basically, the gentleman was a cabbie, and he was sent a fare to go pick up somebody on the Bramlett County Road. It was very, very late, middle of the night. And he doesn't like that area because that area was particularly, excuse me, was particularly rough. There were the stockyards and the slaughterhouses and all of that out there. And he had been driving for this cab company for several years. And about 3 years earlier, there had been a cabbie who had gone out there to pick up a fare. And the man got into the car, stabbed the cabbie to death,
Oh,
and took off with the man's money. The rest of the cab drivers in the region, the area were very upset about it, and they had started cruising that area looking for this person, figuring if he had done it once, he might call for another cab eventually and rob somebody else and kill them. So they started taking guns with them and what have you, and this got to the point where they became vigilantes. And one night there was a guy who got in the cab. He seemed suspicious to this particular cab driver. And so the cab driver shot him. They were all hepped up, scared to death. When the guy didn't die, but he ended up going to jail for the robbery and murder. And he kept saying he was innocent. And all this is kind of floating in the back of this cabbie's mind because he truly avoided this area in Bramlett Road. But he didn't have a choice. So he ended up taking his cab out there in the middle of the night. And he's, pulled up to the spot where he was supposed to wait for this particular fare. And guy's not there. So he decides to get out and smoke a cigarette while he's waiting. He's smoking a cigarette and thinking, if this dude doesn't show in the next couple minutes, then I'm leaving because this is just a creepy place to be in the middle of the night. As he's finishing up the cigarette, he hears a moaning on the far side of the road, like somebody's badly injured, and it spooks him, you know. And I can't say I blame him because there's like 100 possibilities and 99 of them are bad. Like it could be somebody that's really badly injured, but it could also be somebody who's going to try to get him as far away from the cab as they could get him and then attack him. So that's what's in the back of his head, because being a cab driver is a dangerous job. And as he starts to, kind of like, he sort of like doesn't want to go, but on the other hand, the humanity in him's like, dude, you can't just leave them without like getting some help. And he's kind of iffy. And all of a sudden, he hears this rain of punches, like somebody's beating the crap out of this guy, and the guy's moaning, smack, 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 screaming. So this makes the cabbie dive for his vehicle. He gets in his vehicle, and just as he's about to like take off, something, he doesn't see anything, but something slams both fists down on the hood of the car. And he jerks and he jolts backward and he looks, and there is what he describes as a figure. It's almost like a shadow of a figure, but blacker than black. And this thing is literally in front of him. And he said, I froze in place, suddenly terrified. I could still hear the moaning on the other side of the road. I squealed the tires backing up and I screamed, Lord, you're killing him. And I ran. I threw the car in reverse, and this tall, battered figure loomed out behind me, its head lolling, blood-stained, dead features, a knife-torn clothing blocked the road in front of me. And I gasped and floored the pedal, swerved around it, my heart hammering. When I got back to the cabbie office, where the dispatch was, he said, I walked in and I said, I quit. I'm done. I'm never going anywhere like that again. And he said he recognized the man. It was the cabbie who had been stabbed to death a few years earlier. How's that for the start of a spooky episode? That's a terrifying story to me because, what are the odds?
Yeah, and what was still trying to, I mean, the poor guy's dead, who's still trying to beat on him. Yeah, and I also got to
And yeah,
thinking, 1949, cars were made out of some really, really thick steel. So I could just imagine two fists coming down on a hood. Probably wouldn't have done any damage, but it certainly would have made a resounding sound.
yeah, it was. He talked about how loud it was. It was just a horrendous sound. So on to our next story. This one takes place in Maryland. In Maryland, there's a creature that they call the Blue Devil. You don't hear a lot about it now, but it was located originally in Webster County in Maryland, and it came out of nowhere. There are no stories that predate 1939, but there was some flooding and some damage in the interior of this wilderness. This is a very rural area in the 1930s, and the whole area becomes very active suddenly. And this is the story of this thing that they called the Blue Devil. It started out in Webster Springs area of Webster County. Started at the end of 1939. A hunter, a guy, local fellow who did some coon hunting, came to town and he had his best coon dog in the back of the truck. It was all mangled and mauled and ripped to pieces. And the guy told this crazy story that the night before he had heard the dogs carrying on. He had gone outside with his gun thinking a coyote, a bear, bobcat, something like this. And when he got out there, he said he saw this creature, and it had a dog-faced animal about the size of a pony with bluish color, and it resembled a wolf or a coyote. He said it screamed like a banshee, more of a panthery scream. And it was walking along Grassy Creek, which is right by where his property was. And it had come loping toward the dogs and had his best coon dog in its grip. And he shot up in the air and it dropped the dog, but the dog was pretty badly mangled and died. And it took off. Well, he was, he was infuriated by this. And then another fellow by the name of John Clevenger came out and he said he had had an encounter with this thing a couple months earlier and kept his mouth shut because nobody wants to be the crazy guy that starts something like that. And he said his dogs were like, they were coon hunting through the forest. It was the middle of the night. And his dogs were chasing a something. He couldn't see what it was, but they're trained for coon. So he was pretty much figuring it was a coon. And it was December 13th of that year. And when he saw this animal lunging through the trees after the dogs, and it took down one of the dogs. That's very quickly followed a couple days later by a fellow by the name of Ernest Koger from a little area called Jumbo, which is like literally the next little village. And he talks about how his sheep and cattle had been very restless at night for the last 3 or 4 nights, and that he kept going out to check on them because, he thought there was a bear or something around them. And on this night, which would have been mid-December, he went out and one of the cattle was attacked and wounded by an unknown animal, which he later thinks is this blue devil. He didn't see it, but it was badly injured. So after all of this, the hunters from the area gather together and they decide we're going to track this thing down, whatever it is. We can't have anything safe here until we do. Now, this story very quickly makes a local newspaper, gets picked up by the wire services, and within days, it's being reprinted all across the country. It's a little local podunk newspaper at the time, but every so often that would happen. 2 hunters from New York City decide they're going to come down. They bring their professional hunting dogs, and they take them out there to Jumbo. They talk to the local yokels, and they get all this information and are like, "Yep, we're gonna take care of this for you boys. Us professional hunters here, we got this now. Don't worry about it, fellas. We'll deal with it." That's a great idea until they get out in the woods. They are letting the dogs run. The dogs catch a scent. They're good. They're headed for it. They are just baying and running as fast as they can go. And then all of a sudden, one of the dogs yelps and the other dogs whirl and turn and head back the way they came. And they get back to the vehicle and they're slinking around, climbing underneath the truck and waiting. This is not how a coon dog acts. Anybody's ever been around a coon dog when it's smell the scent. These things are fearless. Like they are like torpedoes headed in the direction of the animal they're after. And once they catch that scent, they will circle that tree 100 times, and that's how the hunter knows there's a coon up in the tree. And they don't go off that scent for anything. So these dogs just turning around from the scent of whatever it was, seemed very out of character for a professionally trained coon dog. The dog that yelped, they end up finding it, and he's badly injured. They put him all up in the vehicle. They go back to town. They're like, "We're done. We're headed out. No more." This continues on and on. The Charleston Gazette picks it up. They're making fun of it because, again, local farmers and what have you, and sometimes city people think that they're smarter. So they're making fun. They're saying, "Oh, it's a giant mole," and stuff like that. The Wheeling papers pick it up. They're like, "Oh, we've got no interest in strange animals, but these local fellas back there, and they're making fun." So, stories continue. Now this thing's killed several sheep. It's killed a couple more cattle. And a fellow by the name of Glenn Fisher, of a place called Fisher's Hollow, told the press that he had shot at an animal earlier in December one night when he had heard his livestock going crazy. And he said whatever the animal was, it jumped in the air as a shot struck it. It yelped. And he said, "I waited till morning to see what I had killed, but there was no carcass found." He was sure he had struck that animal, whatever it was, and he had hit it, significantly enough that he was pretty sure he had taken it down. And after that, he didn't see it anymore. So by the end of December of 39, the stories kind of stop. But a couple weeks go by and it starts again. And this time it's a little further down the valleys, a place called Valley Head Rod and Gun Club, excuse me. And it's maybe 15, 20 miles away from where this whole thing had started. And it was December of 1940, so years gone by, and this thing is now coming to task. They're seeing it. They're having issues with livestock being murdered in the middle of the night. The dogs, the hunting dogs, the tracking dogs, they don't want to track it. And then a coal miner from the area, a fellow by the name of Weaver, claimed that he had shot at it. There's another one of the coal miners. His name was Elmer Corley. Now, by now, this thing had hit a feverish pitch, and there were rewards out for killing this thing, and they were matched by the Fish and Game Commission rewards. They were matched by the Rod and Fishing Club. Put out a $200 reward. Altogether, in today's vernacular, there would have been about an $8,000 reward if you shot this animal and you could bring the carcass. So, this was becoming a 7 days wonder. So this second miner, he had a carcass. He said, I don't rightly know what it is. I can't tell you what it is. It's nothing I've ever seen before. But he brought this thing into town, and it was examined by the district game protector. He said it looked like a coyote, but he couldn't make any sense of it for sure because there were things about it that didn't look right. It had a weird bluish color to its skin. It had very little fur, and it was way larger than any coyote he had ever seen. Again, it was almost the size of a pony. There have been no legends prior to this, and since this thing has been killed, well, there are a few people who say they see something like it. So maybe there were more than one of them, but always in that same general area. One of the things I thought was interesting is it said there's obviously supernatural lore and animals that come that we don't know what they are. But this one had a dog-like appearance. It could run on all fours. Or now this was interesting. In the later accounts, some people claimed it reared up and ran on two legs, and it moved at an insanely fast speed, faster than the dogs could run. And if you've ever seen a coon dog, again, those things move like lightning. Now, interestingly enough, there are still every so often random accounts, but very few people are willing to tie it to the Blue Devil. However, I have to tell you, there are still some really interesting accounts that every so often come out of that valley down there. So if you're interested, you can look it up. There's a lot more information. There's even a website I found where there were newspaper clippings, and they have photographs of like large groups of hunters going out to look for this thing and what have you. So it was really some vintage photographs from the 30s and 40s. Very interesting. Now, the next story I wanted to share I thought was a pretty interesting one. So this was a story told by two police officers, and I wanted to share that story with you. So this took place in 2009. There were two officers who got a call for an industrial area of the town, and they recognized right away that it was an area that had kind of fallen on hard times, but somebody had bought up these properties out there, and were refurbishing them. So they were redoing them. So these were old doctors' offices, old businesses, and what have you, and they were basically putting paint on a pig's ear and making them look nice again, just so they could start renting them out again. So they get this phone call about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night that there had been an intruder in one of the buildings up on the top floor, because the buildings were wired for motion and what have you, and they had cameras in them. And so the company had called the police and said, we need you to send somebody out there to check on it. We have a key holder, a person who holds the keys for the properties, and they'll come out and let the police officers in. So the two police officers go out, and they park their car, and to their surprise, they didn't have to wait. The key holder was already here. So he's standing at the door, and he's a middle-aged gentleman, pretty nondescript. The one officer said, if you wanted to describe him, he was brown. He had brown pants, a brown shirt on. His hair was brown. His beard was brown. He had black rimmed glasses, middle-aged, just like an everybody kind of guy. But that was what you would think of him when you saw him. He's like, everything was just brown. And so they went up, and the guy had the key, and he let them in. And he said, they said, do you have the key to the stairs? We don't want to take the elevator because it'll give us away. And he said, I'm sorry, the only key I got's to the front door. They've changed some of the keys for the different things in here. And he walked over and sat down behind the desk where you would, go in and register and what have you, if you were going to one of the offices upstairs. And so the cops took a look at the layout, the floor plan on the wall, and they're like, I guess we're going to have to go up to the top floor, which was the 9th floor of the building, by the elevator, which obviously did not make them very happy because that dinging elevator is going to definitely give them away. But they get in the elevator because they don't have any choice. The brown guy is just sitting down there. He's like, I'll just wait. So that's what's happening. They go up, they get to the top floor, the elevator doors open. There's ambient light coming through from a couple windows in the hallway. There's some subdued lighting, night lighting kind of lighting along the aisleway for the hall. And as they're going, there's about 9 doors that are shut as they're going down the hallway. And the cops want to clear it, so they're trying to open every door, and the doors are all locked. Every one of them, until he gets to the last door at the far end. And then they try that door, and that door is unlocked. So they go in, they clear that room, and all of a sudden they hear this thud, 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 thud. Not like running, but like doors rapidly slamming open and closed. And they turn around and look down the hallway, and every one of the doors had opened themselves. Every one. And now their hackles are really up, because one door opening would have made sense if there's an intruder in there, but 8 doors opening all at one time within seconds. So now they're not sure what they're facing. So they start down as carefully as they can, going door to door, trying to clear each room as they get to it. And they get to the far end, and there's nobody in any of the rooms. And just as they're standing there in the hallway, not far from the elevator, trying to figure out what's the next move, they radio in and they say, look, I think maybe we need a backup. Somebody else needs to get out here. The dispatcher's like, okay, give me a minute. I'll have somebody routed. And just as they're finishing that conversation, all 9 doors slam shut at the same time. Now they're done. They just jump on the elevator. They go back downstairs. The brown guy's gone. They're like, great. So like, he just left us here. And they go back outside, and they go to the car, and they're like, hey, we've left the building. We're waiting for backup. And the dispatcher's like, what do you mean you've left the building? And they're like, we've left the building. We were already up on the 9th floor. And she's like, you can't have been. The key holders just left to come get out there to meet you. And he's like, what are you talking about? We've been in the building for like 20, 25 minutes. She's like, that's not possible. The company that's doing the surveillance and security just called like 5 minutes ago and said they finally got a hold of the key holder, and she'll be out to meet you in a few minutes. Now they're really confused. They're like, no, there was a dude there, like a guy, a brown beard and brown hair, and they describe him. They're like, no, the key holder's a chick. So they're standing there waiting, and the other car pulls up for the cops, and a little blue car pulls up, and a woman jumps out, and she looks like she dressed in the dark. She's got a hoodie on, it's a little askew, and she's, sneakers and a pair of gym pants, and she comes out and she's like, officers, I'm really sorry. I was like sound asleep. I just did not hear that phone. I apologize. It took me this long. I got the key. And they're like, we've been in the building. She's like, how'd you get in the building? I have the only key. He's like, what do you mean the only key? She's like, yeah, I have the only set of keys. That's why I'm called the key holder. I come here, I let people in, I let people out. It's part of my job so that we have some security on the building. And he's like, lady, a man was here. And he describes him, you know, about 5'9", kind of longish brown hair, brown beard, kind of graying, black rim glasses, kind of nondescript, kind of wear one of them jackets with the elbow patches like you used to see in the 80s. You know what I'm talking about?
College
And
professor.
yeah, and all of them are all, and everything he wore was kind of brown. It was tan or brown. And she's like, are you kidding me? And they're like, why? She looks startled. And she's like, look, I owned this building at one time. I sold it to them and I took a job working for this company because like I didn't want to be responsible for this building. My dad owned this building. And when my dad owned this building, up on the 9th floor, there was a doctor who looked just like what you're describing. And one night he jumped out the 9th floor window and committed suicide. And after that, this building just had a bad reputation. People kept saying they saw crap. She's like, you're seriously telling me you saw something that looked like that dude from the 80s that jumped out of that building? And they're like, I don't know what the hell we saw, but we saw him. And man, we can't tell you it was him. They went in with her as soon as the backup came. Totally different vibe in the building. They make it to the 9th floor. All the doors are hanging wide open, just like she thought they should be, because there was no reason the interior doors needed to be locked. And they walked out of there and they said, they don't know what they saw. But whatever they saw, whatever it was, it scared the bejeebers out of those police officers.
Yeah, I got to thinking, if the building was unlocked by the man and the
Mhm.
cops went in, cops came out, wouldn't the building
Right.
have still been unlocked? And you'd think that the key holder would have noticed that the building was unlocked, unless it had one of those like crash bars, on doors where you can get out, but whenever you close it, it stays locked.
Right. Yeah, they didn't say anything. I mean, I don't know if they had even she had even tested the door. She just got out of the car and was apologizing and like seemed really shocked that all of this had occurred. But it was an interesting story. You wonder how many times things like that happen, don't you? Yeah.
Well, you had to know
Because
something was weird, whenever all the doors open and close simultaneously.
yeah, I mean, up till then they thought it was just a regular normal call. And then all of a sudden it wasn't anymore. But on to our next story. So I've always been fascinated with Parkersburg, West Virginia. It's a really interesting place for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of paranormal stuff that goes on there. And there's a lot of Civil War stuff that went on there. There was a lot of early American stuff that went on there. That's where Blennerhassett Island is, and Aaron Burr and Blennerhassett tried to steal Texas when Texas was being negotiated for. They tried to steal Texas and arm it and make it its own country. And that's the reason Aaron Burr fed the country, not because he killed Hamilton, although I'm not a big Hamilton fan, so I never held that against him. But
You've
anyway,
mentioned that before.
there's something, well, like the dude figured out how to tax us federally and and make the government grow. I just like, there's nothing I like about this guy. I'm an anti-federalist. I think that the power should be kept closer home. But anyway, so there's a ton of history there. By the way, there's a place called the Blennerhassett Hotel. Anybody who wants to find a weekend of really just beautiful scenery, this is a gorgeous hotel. The amenities are very comfortable, but it still has a lot of the classic charm of a hotel from the late 17, early 1800s. It's beautiful, beautiful building. The whole area is just so scenic. You can take a ferry out to Blennerhassett Island. It's now owned by the federal government. And just check the whole place out. It's great. I love going to Parkersburg. So when I saw this story, I've actually been to this particular cemetery. I did not know this when I got there, though. So this is a place called the Tug Fork area out near can't talk, near Mill Creek. There's a place called the Riverview Cemetery. Now, this cemetery, it's got these great big heavy iron fencing around it. It's always locked up. I don't believe there's been a new interment there in quite a long time. But one of the first things that people talk about is this huge black dog in the Riverview Cemetery. So people have come along and they see this huge black dog walking through the cemetery. The dog sometimes will come and bark at them, and sometimes people think, oh my gosh, how this dog get locked up in the cemetery? And they start looking for, a way for the dog to get out, or they call the police for help or things like that. And the dog just disappears. So I thought it was that's a really interesting place. And like I said, it's a huge chain link fence. And the dog is seen all off and on wandering through the cemetery, and it goes up to certain tombstones, and it pauses at these same tombstones over and over again. People that live in the area have seen it happen multiple times. It'll dig or scratch a little bit at the earth, and then here's the most interesting part. As this is going on, people are watching it, and then as the dog starts to dig and carry on, these three black crows come out of the trees above, and they land on tombstones, and they watch the dog. Now, this is what makes this really interesting. The tombstone that he's digging at, the tombstone that the birds are watching, is called the Weeping Woman. It is a tombstone that is designed as a statue of a mournful woman draped across the top and the back of the tombstone as though she's flung herself down in grief. And according to the lore, this lady, the grieving woman, will stand up and walk through the cemetery at night, wringing her hands and crying for all the lost souls of the Civil War. They don't know where the black dog fits into all of this. Is it a guardian? Is it part of this process? Are they two separate hauntings? There is a woman by the name of Susan Shepard who lives in the Parkersburg area, and back around 2000-ish, she made quite a stir. She was on TV a few times, and she wrote some really cool books. She also made these kind of creepy dolls called poppets, I believe, and they're kind of like a New England version of a voodoo doll. That's about the closest I've ever come to explaining them. And she was interviewing a lot of people. She was interviewing people in the area about the cemetery, the dog, the weeping woman, and all of that. And she came across this woman who was a nurse, and she said that she had an experience in that cemetery. The woman had seen the dog right around the time her own mother passed away. The nurse had seen the dog. And she said that what had happened was she had been in the hospital working as a nurse and had been tending to a woman who had a catastrophic stroke. They were not expecting her to survive, but she was still alive at the end of the nurse's shift that day. So the nurse left the hospital and she walked out to the car, get in her car like she did every day, and suddenly a large black dog appeared out of nowhere. It did not come from out of the distance. She literally said, it dropped down beside me. It was suddenly just there. And she looked down at it, and she was shocked to see that the dog's face had transformed into the face of the woman with the catastrophic stroke. And the dog walked in front of her car as she stood there beside the car, staring in shock, and then vanished. So the nurse was shocked. She gets down on her hands and knees, and she's like looking under the car, between the cars, trying to find out where this dog went, because it had to be an optical illusion. But the dog just vanished. It couldn't have happened that way. And there was a friend in the parking lot who saw her and thought she was like looking for her car keys or something. So she yelled, "Hey, are you okay? Is everything all right?" And the friend walked over and she said, the woman told her, she said, "Did you see the dog? Did you see the black dog? Where did it go?" And the woman's like, "What are you talking about? I watched you walk out of the hospital. You paused for a second, and then you got to the car, and then you dropped down on the ground and was looking for something." She's like, "You did not see a black dog?" "Nope, didn't see a black dog." And this is like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. In fact, the nurse took note of it. It was exactly 4:10. When she came back in the next day to work, she had expected that the woman who had passed away, and indeed she had, at 4:10 in the afternoon, at the exact moment that the dog appeared to her. And she recognized the dog because she had seen it before in the cemetery when she had gone to tend her mother's grave.
I found it interesting that you said it was 3 crows that landed on the tombstone. And you know that a group of 3 or more crows is called a murder.
So I thought of that myself whenever I was reading it. I was hoping somebody would catch on. But it
Oh,
is an
okay.
interesting thing.
I'll cut that part out then.
No, leave it in it. You got it.
Hmm.
So our next one is called the Selbyville Swamp Monster of Delaware. Now, Delaware has this beautiful, it's a beautiful state. A lot of it's very pretty. It's very, there's parts of it that are very rural. It's parts of it are, of course, very cityfied and what have you. But this area called the Great Cypress Swamp area it was at one time the most eastern forest for cypress. Cypress usually grows in the south in the wet
Oh yeah,
and what
yeah.
have you, but they had like 100 and some acres of swamp that the cypress was growing in. It was gorgeous. And a lot of people should know that, like, when you're looking at the cypress, the water, the tannins from the trees that grow up out of that water actually cause that water to be brown. So it's dark, it's mucky, it has a weird smell to it because there's a lot of rotting vegetation down in there as well, because obviously the cypress leaves fall off and the berries and everything, and they fall down into the water. So it has a very distinctive look and smell. And part of it burned a long time ago, but there's still about 70, 75 acres of this forest that's still, this swampland that still exists. And this is the area where we're going to encounter our next story. A lot of people in the local area refer to it as the burnt swamp because it was the burnt swamp at one point. Selbyville swamp monster, the Delaware swamp monster. So yep, back to the 1960s we go. This was the first reported sighting of something coming out of the swamps. This happened not too long after the burnings, and local people speculated that perhaps it was whatever this was driven to the edges of the swamp because of what had happened with the fire. So what happened, the first sightings took place in the late 1960s, late fall, early winter, and people saw a large, hairy humanoid lurking in the shadows of the swamp, like basically muddling along in the shadows of the trees. They described it as standing over 7 feet tall, covered in thick matted fur, with piercing red eyes. And that was one of the most distinctive features about it, that they knew it was something different. And people who saw it often said the red eyes haunted their dreams, haunted their nightmares. The sightings coincided with a series of unexpected noises and disturbances, leading to a frenzy of speculation and fear among the local populace. The impact to the community was profound. Farmers began to talk about strange disturbances on their land, missing livestock. There was a lot of that going on, and a lot of restlessness of the animals during the nights. There was like a lot nocturnal visits, doors being opened in barns and ripped off hinges, and fences being ripped out, fence poles even being broken. That is like some of that stuff you might blame on humans, but I have to tell you, if you've ever set a fence pole in your life, and I have, those things are in tight and no human being's going to break them in half. So, all of this is suddenly picking up, and people are talking about it. There were no legends about there being swamp monsters out there until after the fires in the 1960s. This starts. And if this beast has been seen, or beasts, there might be a breeding population, I don't know. And but they've been seen off and on ever since. The 1960s was the apex, which would make a little sense if you're thinking that, you know, its habitat was disturbed and it's trying to figure out where to go and how to survive. And if it was hunting in the wild now, you know, there's cattle and sheep sitting around, so they're easier to catch. They're pretty docile comparatively. So that's what started it. And it's a story that still to this day, every so often somebody sees. Now, what is it? I don't know. But it's made its way into the folklore, the culture, and there are people every couple years who come along who, you know, they talk about it. And then there's this story. Now, I want to say that I don't feel this story in particular about the swamp monster is as detailed as I would like it to be. I know the author of this story, and the man was a man of great integrity, who did his research. So here we go. He tells this story that there were two police officers, and they were called to the swamp on Cypress Road up by Selbyville because a car had been found abandoned in the swamp. And they were called out there. Now, this is like right along the Delaware-Maryland border. So the actual area is kind of a borderline. So both areas had gotten a phone call. So there's literally a Delaware officer and a Maryland officer, and they end up bumping into each other out there because they're both investigating the same abandoned vehicle. And this was, so they're out there, they get out of the car, and they begin to talk, the two police officers. And I wanted to share. So they're talking about this and about, you know, hey, you know, there's nobody out here. The car is in the swamp, but it was far enough out you could see about 70% of the car. And they looked, they found there were no bodies, there was nothing there, and there were no footprints that they could see. There was no, like, you know, somebody clawing out of the mud. There would be muck along the side, or maybe a shoe fell off or anything, nothing, just the car. And so they radio and they're like, you know, what are we going to do? So the one officer says, well, I've already radioed in. I'm getting my commander to come out here. He gets paid enough money to figure this out. He can figure out what we're supposed to do. Are we going to just pull the car out? Are we going to mark it as a possible crime scene? He's not sure what's going to happen. So each of the officers decide to just, you know, wait it out till this commander gets there. And then they're going to figure out what they're going to do about this particular scene. So it's dark. It's the middle of the night. They both have their cars pointed toward the swamp. Both of them have their driver's doors open. Both of them are standing outside their driver's door. You know, so you couldn't shut the door because they're between the door and the car itself. And they're talking over the tops of their car at each other. And one officer's name is Dover. And they're talking about, you know, what are we going to do? And they've looked around now enough. They go back to the cars. The lights are running, you know, they have the cars running, so the lights are shining. That's kind of like how they have an area to see along with the flashlights. What they found was a white Pontiac coupe, and it was stuck in the muddy part of the swamp. At the edge of a swamp, there was a ditch. There was nothing to find in the forest. It's way too deep and you know, for them to be able to move and do much with it. Swiggins is the other officer, Officer Swiggins, and he's smoking a cigarette and he's talking and he's saying, you know, this isn't the first car that was found out here. Last summer, they found a car out here, same thing, car out in the swamp all by itself. Never did find the fellow who must have been driving it. You know, he's like, and the other officer, you know, Dover, he's like, I don't want to talk about it, you know. I don't believe in that crap. It's just an accident. Somebody wandered off. Hopefully they aren't stuck in the swamp somewhere. They took a look around, and this other officer, keeps talking. This other fella gets really brave. So Dover keeps talking, and Swiggins is, he's like, let it be. And he's smoking, and he's like, just be quiet. It's fairy tale stuff you tell the little kids to scare them and old ladies. And he's like, but I'm not going. I don't believe any of this. And he said, maybe there's a monster out here. They talk about there being a monster out here. And Swiggins shoots him down again. He says, stop. So the other officer gets on the phone or on the radio, and he's talking, like asking for an ETA for the commander. When's he going to get out here? And he's told it'll be another 20 minutes or so. And he looks out, and he looks up to tell the other cop, hey, we're going to have another 20 minutes. You might as well just get in the car and sit down, and we wait. And the other cop's not there. And suddenly he's like looking around, and like there's nobody there, like nothing. He's gone. The cigarette's not laying on the ground. There's nothing. And so he gets back on the radio, and he's like, hey, the other officer's just disappeared. I don't know where he's at. I'm going to look for him. And they said, no, negative. Get back in your car. Just stay put till somebody else comes. We're sending a couple more cars. We're routing them your way. They all get out there. The officer was never found. There is no answer. And I looked, I've run the names. I actually have their names. I've run their through both states database. And normally I wouldn't tell you a story that doesn't have an ending, except for the gentleman who wrote the story. He's a good researcher. And if there isn't an ending, there isn't an ending. But Ed Okonowitz is the gentleman who researched and wrote this story. I've known him for, not well, but I've known him for over 20 years, and his reputation as a good writer and a good researcher convinced me that even though I don't have all the answers, because he didn't have all the answers, I'm going to start poking around at this story a little. And if I get anything, I'll let you know. But you
Okay.
do have to wonder what happened to the cop, because his footprints ended beside his car. There was ashes from where he was flicking them off his cigarette, but the cigarette and the officer just vanished. And I just thought that was a really interesting story. So this next story is from the Pacific Northwest. So this is from Oregon area, and it's told by a gentleman who is or was a ranger, park ranger. And he worked as a game warden part of the time, and he was a park ranger as well. So in his job as a game warden, he got a phone call about a drunken poacher who was shooting out near a house, shooting at deer. So he and his partner get in the car, and they head out that way, the truck, whatever they're driving, gets out that way, and he pulls onto this street. It's right at the edge of town, and there's the house. The person's waiting up at the house to, for them to pull in. He pulls in. The other officer gets out, and he says, I'll go interview them. You want to take a look around? And he's like, sure, that's not a problem. So he walks across the road in the direction that the person's pointing, and they've come down the driveway, and they start talking to the officer that's going to do the interview. And this particular fella, he listens long enough to get enough information to figure out where he needs to start. And then he takes off across the road, and he doesn't take him long. He finds a 30-06 shell casing along the edge of the road, and there's that lingering smell of gunpowder when you just shoot. It's distinctive. If you've ever shot a gun, you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So he thought, well, he sees a little patch of what looks like blood, and he's thinking, did he actually wound a deer? Did he wound himself? What happened? But he decides he's going to take off. You can see a faint trail ahead of him going down into the woods along this little ridge top. So he starts down there, and his thought is he's going to find a wounded deer. That's what he's expecting. And he gets down on this ridge line, and he's kind of looking around, and he said, that's when I made my way to the tree line, and I lucked out and I found a spot, a fresh impact spot on a tree. So he started taking pictures with his phone, and he noticed blood on the ground off to the side of the impact spot on the tree where something had like gouged into it and had ripped out the little bit of bark. He followed it further down into the woods, and he said, I'm standing on the ridge top there, that little gully, and I'm listening, and I hear something moving loud. And this is how he wrote it. He said, I start hearing something moving through the forest. It's coming up the gully at me, but out of sight because of all the trees. I thought it was a wounded deer and was about to step forward to get a sight when a repugnant smell reached my nose. It was a faint scent of decaying meat and other smells that I won't mention. If you've ever been near a corpse, you'd know that not just the corpse decomposing smells, but everything they had consumed will also decompose and smell. It's one of the worst smells you can ever smell, and if you smell it, you don't forget it. And whatever this thing was, it wasn't trying to be sneaky. And I was just about to yell, "Game warden," expecting to see a person, but that's when I caught sight of something in this narrow spaces between the tree trunks. I couldn't move as I caught that flash of something brown, dark brown, maybe brown and black. I couldn't quite tell. It was coming closer, pulling up the gully, moving the brush. The smell was getting strong. I had to breathe more through my mouth. I could make out a little more detail through the trees as it was getting closer. I saw flashes of fur or hair. I don't know. It was something like that. And the moment I could see it, it was between the trees that were too short to absorb the sight of that animal anymore. Eventually the trees became less dense and I could see this thing moving. What he saw, he describes as having part of its thigh rotted off, its intestines sticking out, trailing out of it. At first he thought that it was badly wounded. And then as he looked at it closer, as it was coming at him, he could see that the flesh was gray and there was greenish pus running out of it. And it was missing one of its cheeks, whatever it was. And he said, this thing shouldn't have been standing. Its one leg was the bone showing through. There's no way its chest cavity was holding in all of its intestines and stuff. It shouldn't have been alive. It didn't look at me. It didn't even seem to have eyes, but it kept shambling along, loud, moving quick. And one of its feet was missing. It literally was walking on the stub of its ankle.
Dude.
I know that it sounds crazy, but I truly believe I might have seen the zombie or the living dead, or what you want to call it, or maybe a Bigfoot or some other animal that we don't know is out there. I thought that was quite a tale to tell.
Yeah, and a half.
Yeah. I kind of cleaned up a little bit because he goes into very graphic detail about how badly messed up it was. So.
No, thank you for that. So I don't have to do as much editing.
No problem.
Oh, before you start, the funny thing, when you said it was making a lot of noise,
Right.
if you've ever deer hunted in Pennsylvania, the sound of a deer walking through leaves sounds almost exactly like a man dragging a bicycle through the leaves. I mean, they're pretty noisy. So I could see a game warden thinking that it was a deer or some other type of game first. So.
Right. I mean, that would have been the logical thing to think anyway.
Yeah. It's just the sound. It's like they don't. I mean, they're cognizant of smells and sights and things like that, or motion. But when it comes to the smells and the motion. But when it comes to the sound that they're making, it's like they're oblivious to it. So.
Yeah, I mean like when they're in rut. I mean, for those who don't know, when a deer's in rut, like they will wander in front of cars. They will do anything. They'll come at you. they're blind literally to everything around them because they're in heat. So, and they're noisy. They're terribly noisy. I've heard them crashing in cornfields and what have you. So it's a very different experience. Living out in the woods is a different experience than living in a city. And they have their own. I'm gonna do an episode, I think, of just like ghost stories that are attached to things that only happen in cities. I do a lot in the country because that's where I live and that's what I know the best. But
Mhm.
um, they have their own sets of stories to tell. This last story is from Johnson County, Tennessee. It's called The Hag of Belvin's Gap. Excuse me, Belvin's Gap. It's a narrow little cut on the ridge line in Johnson County, and it's an interesting story. Never heard a story quite like it. You know that gray period when the morning's coming on and it's just a little twilighty yet, not quite day, not quite night anymore? That's the time when this thing comes out. She's always seen along that little piney ridge in Belvin's Gap. The woman, nobody knows who she is or was. They just call her the Hag of Belvin's Gap. She's described always the same way. She's standing in tattered clothing. Her feet are bare. She's bone thin. Her long hair is hanging like wet straw down over her shoulders. And she has no face, just a blur of skin, or some people describe it like something flickering in and out, almost like she can't quite focus her face. She only appears at the first light, never any other time. And lots of folks have seen her. Local hikers tell stories who've about what they've seen there many, many times, always at dawn and almost always when you're by yourself. There's a gentleman who claimed that in his 1970s, when he was a teenager, he saw her watching him from the woods while he was hiking out to his hunting stand. He got up, turned around and backed and blacked out. And when he woke up, he was miles off course. He doesn't remember how he got there, but he remembered the last thing he saw was that being facing him. He said his dog was gone and they never did find the dog. In the 2000s, early 2000s, there was a woman who spotted a figure in rags in a raspberry thicket just as the sun was rising. She was only there for half a second and then vanished. That same week, a college student vanished while camping right along that same spot. They just said she got lost in the woods. And they say that this woman, when you see her, she's a warning, a harbinger. Something bad's about to happen. Sometimes to your family, but never to you. And sometimes to just another soul who wanders through. But those who see her, they don't forget the hag. There are thousands and thousands, probably millions of stories, each and every one of them different and unique. Some are folklore, some are urban legend, and some I truly do believe are true. Whatever they are, this Halloween, as you walk through it doing whatever it is you do, be safe, take care, and make sure you're watching what's watching you. Happy Halloween.